Freedom Council is nothing without all of you. How do we go about getting people held criminally responsible for their acts? The military is still at risk. Election interference, the medicalization of childhood. These drug dealers like Pfizer and Moderna, we can seize their property. We develop our litigation through conferences like this. It's going to come through communications. It's going to come through conversations. And Freedom Council is that conversation.
For information, visit freedomcouncil.org. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Davidson, and with me, as always, is the lovely and talented attorney Warner Mendenhall. How are you doing today, Warner?
I'm good. Your introduction is really something that you put together. I'll tell you what, every time I look at it, I'm like, woo.
I know, we sound so legitimate.
Well, it really encapsulates, the problems and the thousands of people, millions who've really been injured by these shots, the COVID shots and other shots. And it's just, it's just broken. So
it is. So that's why we're here. And today we have Dr. Patrice Quaddrel and Russ Barger, who are going to talk about their fight against mandates while she was in medical school. So let's get them in here.
Great.
Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So you had a pretty impressive fight. Russ, do you want to kind of launch into the history of the fight and what it was about?
Sure. So I'm a member of Sullivan Law Firm in Wahoo, Nebraska, which is between Lincoln and Omaha. Creighton University had put in a vaccine mandate, and the students did not want to take the drug. They had no exemptions available in the medical side and only limited religious exemptions allowed. Excuse me, I have that backwards. They had a few medical exemptions and no religious exemptions allowed. The students that stood against them were coerced, I would say, into signing an agreement that they could continue going to school until the FDA actually approved the COVID vaccines. And then when they allegedly approved them in the fall of 2022, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Patrice. Was it fall of 22 or fall of 21?
Fall of 21.
It was okay. It was 21 then. They put the students in a position that we have this information showing that Comirnaty and Spikevax are approved. And it was not approved, as many of us attorneys have actually argued. It was sort of this sleight of hand that went on, where Pfizer and Moderna said that these things would be not available, the Comirnaty and the Spikevax. All that would remain was the EUA drug, the emergency use authorized vaccine.
And Russ, can I break in? Can I break in on this? I just want to say, we have really, as lawyers and Freedom Council, have gone over and over and over this to figure out what was going on. And we do have a document on this specifically to Pfizer that it had marketing approval for one day in 2021, August 23rd. It opened that day, it closed that day. The next day, there was no marketing approval for it. And then we have all done extensive searches to find out if the vaccines were actually available, quote unquote vaccines, by the way. I don't agree that they're vaccines. So if I use that, I'm misnaming it. And we could not find anywhere in our state, and we're in Ohio, that any of those vaccines was available. And in fact, on the materials, the government materials, it actually says on those materials that they're not available. So after extensive search for years, they were not available that fall to anybody.
That is correct. I mean, and on the actual approval documentation, it literally says this approved drug is not available for marketing in the U.S. So that's a whole nother issue. But what's important to our students is that the EUA and the approval should have been something that Creighton would look at. They have their own medical school, and they should have been able to see that the same EUA drug that everyone had been taking was still the only drug that was available in the fall of 2021. And so our students did not want to take it. They refused to agree that an FDA-approved version was available. And then to add insult to injury, Creighton told them very early in the semester, it was like the first week of September, you have to take this. And oh, by the way, drop ad just ended last week. And you have to pass all of the tuition for the classes that you can't take. Otherwise, we won't release your transcript so you can flee to another school. So it was coercion, I would say, to the greatest degree possible. And some of the district judges, I think, are having a hard time knowing what to do on these kinds of cases. We have multiple causes of action. The district judge was not speedy in his first decision on their motion to dismiss. It was basically 2 sentences long, said the case was dismissed. And we have since argued the case to the Nebraska Supreme Court. All the briefs are filed. You can get on the Nebraska Supreme Court's website and listen to the oral argument. So we're awaiting a decision on that. We have a similar case here in Nebraska. It's Hannah Fisher and Conan Thomas versus Southeast Community College. It's another vaccine mandate case where the community college, the state college, refused to offer any kind of exemptions. And of course, they kicked one student out, Ms. Fisher, who is in nursing. And then Conan Thomas, who is a veteran who had applied for a new program. It's been about 2 years ago now. After the emergency had ended, according to federal HHS, and he didn't feel he should have to file an exemption request. They did eventually come up with exemptions about 2 years after the fact. Everyone that had been kicked out had already been long kicked out from Southeast. So we have 2 issues. One, whether that mandate was ever legal. And 2, whether the mandate could still be legal. I would need to look, but at least a few months ago, they still had that mandate in place. You could just have an exemption. And that's still an issue. I don't think most people realize. In a lot of medical schools across the country, they're still mandating that their students take the COVID vaccine. So that's sort of where it's at. I think that's probably a good 20,000-foot look, John. I don't know if you wanted more. And I should mention, Patrice is actually a dentist. She wasn't going to medical school. She was going to dental school. So we just need to be accurate on that also.
Understood. Thank you. Speaking of Dr. Quaddrel, could you tell us a little bit about your experience, not only in how it was for you, but how were the other students when they were faced with this? I mean, because I think a lot of us are really curious about the experience of people in dental school or medical school or any kind of higher education that encountered these mandates. And what was it like finding an attorney? I mean, what were the obstacles? Because I know for me personally in 2020 and 2021, there were no attorneys that were fighting from what I could see, or very, very few.
Absolutely, John. It was It was really interesting being in this situation when you're also in school to study medicine and to study dentistry and to study healthcare, and you have an understanding of science, and you can look at a research paper and a white paper and for the most part comprehend probably a little more than the general public, just because, your ability to understand the vocabulary and other things. I can tell you I learned a lot about the FDA testing process and how clinical trials are done and phases 1, 2, and 3. So during this process, I had anticipated that the phase 3 clinical trials would take several years, and I would be able to graduate. I was less than a year away from graduating before I was basically banned from campus, and I don't know if you would use the word expelled, but basically expelled and not able to continue my education, and ended up graduating a year later than I anticipated. Thanks to Russ and Bob for helping me navigate that. But it was a really tested time. I have some close friends that I would discuss, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to get it? Are you not? Are you going to wait until they force us? Like, what do we do? So there were some students that jumped on it right away and had no hesitation. And there was others of us that really held out until the end. Obviously, I was the only student, both that I know of from Creighton Medical School and Creighton Dental School, that did not get the vaccine and stood the test of time and didn't ever get it. I remember there was one student that had just had given birth, a few months prior, and she was breastfeeding. She was very, very hesitant to get the vaccine. But for her, the risk of not being able to finish her education on time was too great. And so, she really felt like she didn't have an option and she had to get it. I had a few other students that, like you mentioned, they didn't know how they would find legal counsel. And it was just, a lot of students in my class had kids, and it was too stressful to navigate that and risk not being able to provide for their families. So I was luckily in a position where I actually found Bob and Russ through some connections at a local gym that I went to. I just happened to be talking to someone and they mentioned that they were aware of them, and I ended up getting connected. So if you want to talk about a miracle, I think that might be one, because I have no idea how I would have found a lawyer or even, started my search. So I really got lucky that I felt like God really handed me them right when I needed them, like my greatest time of need, because I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I couldn't go back to school, and it was a really stressful time.
How do you feel now? I mean, you saw the intro to the show. I mean, you talk about God giving you a signal, right, of who to work with. I feel the same way in terms of how I came across so many of these injured people who were silenced otherwise. Has time sort of validated your feelings when the mandate started?
Oh, 100%. We actually have a plaintiff on our case. She was a law student, and she was just getting ready to take her bar exam, and she ended up getting the vaccine and was vaccine injured. And I've had many discussions with her, and my heart just goes out to her and anyone else that's been vaccine injured, because, I don't think anyone should have to risk their job or their education, to be medically safe and medically sound, and, risk their health and their livelihood. But I do have to say this fight has been worth it. The fight's not over. Like Russ mentioned, we're still waiting for, the Nebraska Supreme Court to get back to us on the papers that we filed so far. But 100%, I did have to sit out a year of school. I wasn't able to graduate with my graduating class. Everyone moved on and started their lives, in a sense. And I was still stuck and had to, as Russ mentioned, I had to pay for an extra semester. Just so you have a rough estimate, dental school is about $40,000 a semester. So I had to pay an extra $40,000 to finish. I wasn't able to graduate with my class. And then on top of it, you have the lost income, of not being able to continue. But all of that aside, I'm just so thankful that I have my health intact. I'm so thankful I get to practice. I was just seeing patients this morning. I love dentistry. I love what I do. And I'm just really grateful, despite the tribulations, that I've been able to be in this career.
How is your current employer now about everything? Are they aware of the fight? Are they sort of supporting you, or do they sort of, hands off, stay neutral? What's the community like there?
I've been a little hesitant to share a lot of details about the case with the workplace. So if I feel if I feel that there's an appropriate environment, I will. At my current job, that's not something that I felt that I needed to tell or to share. I've had a few discussions. I work with another doctor there, and I've had a few discussions with him about vaccines in general. I would say he is more on the pro-vaccine side, and so I haven't really brought this up. And I part of me wanted to wait until we had a final conclusion, because these lawsuits can take many years, and I didn't really want to drag him through this with me. I think at some point that I will reveal that information, but for now it's really been more of a personal fight, and then also among the plaintiffs that are on the case.
Warner, Russ, this has gone on for her for years. And this is the same situation that we deal with so many of the plaintiffs that you represent. Why does it take so long for justice in terms of civil rights and the defense of their civil rights to occur? What the heck is going on?
I can weigh in here for a minute, Russ, and then you can maybe follow up. But I mean, in our cases, initially we went in for temporary restraining orders, and I don't think we won a single. Well, we did win one actually, and it happened to be for a doctor. But we out of multiple temporary restraining orders against the employers, against hospitals, and other organizations, we only have one victory to our name. The irony of that is that it was a judge appointed by Jimmy Carter, an old school liberal who believed in personal liberty, who granted the TRO, temporary restraining order, to keep this doctor employed in his residency. He completed medical school, was halfway through his residency, and was about ready to get kicked out of that residency by Kettering here in Ohio. So, and Wright State University, I'll name the university in that case. So it has really been a battle. I mean, initially, especially early on, and I'd say fall of 21 and early 2022, the courts were still, it just seemed like the judges themselves and their staff were still freaked out about COVID. And even though many of us had moved on and realized it was actually, just a disease that could not be addressed with certainly so-called vaccines, everybody stuck to their guns on that. And, and then you get into the litigation. We've had many, many lawsuits. Most of them are resolving favorably in terms of a settlement. And there have been a number of trials now across the country, but it just takes years to go through the entire process. And essentially, I feel like, Russ, you may feel the same way. We're living back in a COVID crisis that is long past us, but we live it every day along with our clients and try to convince the judges as to what happened. This issue about was it approved? Was it available? How virulent was this illness? Who was affected? And certainly it's obvious that young people did not need any shot. They really survived COVID handily, unless they had extreme comorbidities. And those are things that we just can't seem to get through to the courts. And then it all does come down to a case called the Jacobson case. And we've had some bad news on that this week. The Ninth Circuit ruled against, reversed its initial opinion to say that Jacobson still applies. And I'll go into that real briefly, but that's a very dangerous precedent that they have established, that basically the governments can impose almost any, health mitigation as long as they have the thinnest of reeds to stand on. And that's very unfortunate. I hope that case gets appealed, and we certainly salute the attorneys and the organization that is fighting that.
So Jacobson, that's what Jacobson does.
Yeah, Jacobson's an old case about the smallpox vaccine that mandated it in Massachusetts. This is from the early part of the 20th century. But in that case, though, one of the interesting things that was argued on appeal, the attorney Scott Street, and one of the interesting things that was argued on appeal is that, they alleged in their complaint that this did not stop transmission. And one of the key findings in Jacobson was that yes, there's a debate scientifically about whether it stops transmission, but the vast majority of people at the time thought it did, and that was a reasonable mandate. At this point, it's absolutely, very well known that the COVID shots do not stop transmission. And in fact, they didn't even contract to stop transmission initially.
So, if case law is how we establish precedent in the courts, what nightmarish case law have we established with COVID moving forward?
Just the fact that Jacobson is still extant law and controlling on the lower courts. Jacobson needs to be repealed. And Jacobson was the basis for some horrific decisions following Jacobson about interventions, for example, to sterilize women. And also the Korematsu decision to basically create camps for Japanese citizens. So Jacobson has a very blemished history. It needs to be overturned. It has been used for some terrible decisions out of the Supreme Court. And we need to restore basically our liberty to make our own medical decisions. And Russ, if you would address this as well, I mean, we still have an ongoing problem with medical students and firefighters who need to do EMT work and things like that. And so we are continuing in Freedom Council, by the way, Patrice, if anyone needs help, we do have now a group of about almost 300 attorneys that are very well educated on these issues. They've educated themselves, they've educated each other, and they are ready to step up on issues like flu vaccine mandates, which Cleveland Clinic just said have negative efficacy. And, they're so bad that if you take it, you're more likely to get the flu. And we have that going on right now in the military and hospitals among medical students. Right now, today, we still have these fights going on. But go ahead, Russ. What do you think?
Well, and I just to dovetail off what you've said, Warner, Jacobson is a really old case, and the case law has since taken a turn where the 14th Amendment and due process rights, bodily autonomy, ironically, I mean, a lot of that had to do with Bowers versus Hardwick. It was a lot of things to do with like contraception and even abortion. Those two worlds have not really been reconciled yet by the Supreme Court. The substantive due process rights for bodily autonomy that have come out of even Roe, Dobbs. I mean, there's a line of cases where you can't be giving prisoners whatever kind of drugs you want to give them if they don't want it. They have some autonomy. But the Supreme Court they're not always clear in their decisions. There's a case that we rely on called Cruzon where we argue that bodily autonomy is a fundamental right because they don't mention it going under the rational basis test. Essentially, if a government can do about what it wants, as long as it's not completely arbitrary and capricious, if you can get under the rational basis test. But if it's a fundamental right, then the state has to make a pretty significant showing for whatever regulation they have. But let me be clear, I think, on our mandate cases. The first thing I would mention is that Lucia Sinatra, she might be a person you would consider interviewing because she watches these student mandate cases across the country. She's a former corporate attorney, lives out in California. I haven't looked at her list, but she generally has a map on showing, I think it's called Stop the Mandates.
No college mandates. I actually made one of the maps
No
for her.
college mandates.
We're friends.
Okay. Oh, then you know very well who I'm talking about. But we don't have to prove that the vaccine was safe or effective. But the main thrust of our cases is that these two schools, Creighton and Southeast Community College, appear to be almost alone in offering no exemptions or extremely limited exemptions to their students, especially a Catholic college, who teaches about the inviolability of human life, not allowing their students to have religious exemptions. I mean, there's just so many ironies in the Creighton case. They didn't have any mandates for their staff or their faculty. It was just the students. People do not realize that students are probably the most abused class in many ways. They do not have the protections of Title VII. They don't have clear legal status compared to most adults. And Creighton is just a perfect example of the school knowing that the students are going to have to rely on contract rights, on negligence, on due process. I shouldn't say substantive due process. I mean, one of our claims is that it's under the Consumer Protection Act that they were being deceptive. They have a medical school. They should know exactly what that EUA approval process showed, that there was literally not one bottle of Carminati or Spikevax in all of the state of Nebraska or in any state of the United States for that matter. So it's hard. If you want to go look for your list of statutes that says you can do, you have a right to not take mandated drugs, good luck.
It's funny.
I haven't seen very many proposed.
South Park did a whole episode on college basketball where he compared, where Cartman was representative for the NCAA, and he compared basketball players for college as slaves. And it was, if you haven't seen it, it was 2011 when they came out with that episode. It was pretty brilliant. But yeah, the universities have exploited students. They endanger their physical bodies for generating income and attention for the universities. They don't pay the students for what they get. Maybe you get a scholarship. And now we've learned this now with like Dr. Quaddrel, what she went through is, again, students are, you're right, they're not taken care of. They are exploited. They are disregarded, and you're almost treated like a commodity.
I have a question for Patrice. Did any administrator support you? And in your point that, this is a medical school, why were they unaware of this, and why were they not following the statistics and the data that was coming out? Do you have any explanation for that?
Well, Werner, I think there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, that I wasn't privy to, but I did not have any administrators that were on my side from Creighton overall. However, I did have a few dental professors or dental instructors that worked on the clinic floor that did reach out and would check on me during that year that I was expelled and ask me if there was anything they could do and just make sure I was doing okay. I also had one administrator that did have me sign some paperwork that allowed me not to lose my credits. That's a big thing in dental, and I'm sure it applies to medical as well. But if you look to transfer to a different school or if you sit out more than a year, you usually lose the majority of your credits, and you either have to start a new program over or you get defaulted back to maybe, your second year, right before you're able to go into clinics. So I had also looked at those options and was very defeated that I applied to 44 other schools in the country, and not a single one would consider me or take me or allow me to graduate within the next year. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, you start to wonder why is a school doing this? Why is a Jesuit school, pushing this so hard? And you have to wonder, is there money coming in? Who's making these decisions? Is there funding going on behind the scenes if a certain percentage of their student body is vaccinated? I don't have the stats on that, but I can't help but think that, there was something going on related to money. We did acquire some knowledge later on, about a year after, that one of the board members at Creighton is very closely associated with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and is actually their main go-to in terms of family planning, immunizations, and anything related to that realm. So he just happens to be a Creighton grad. He has an MD, and he did graduate from Creighton Medical School. And I found that to be really interesting because, if you dive deeper into that, you start to see that, in a nutshell, they basically want to vaccinate the world. So, I don't know, Warner. I don't know if Russ has some more information he can provide, but I just felt like there was maybe maybe some shady things going on behind the scene, but unfortunately really punished the students. And like Russ mentioned, the staff and any employee of Creighton was protected. And so they didn't have to deal with the same restrictions. They were all able to file exemptions that were accepted, but the students were really, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, and that's something I'd like Russ maybe to address. But I mean, the fact that the staff was exempted is absolutely disproves whatever they were trying to do, because then you have a whole population that if this shot did prevent transmission, certainly it was coming, being transmitted through the staff at that point. So that is really illogical. The other thing that you point out, that this is a Jesuit institution, I can tell you, based on literally hundreds of students that we represented trying to get exemptions, the Jesuits were hardline. We have Xavier University here in Ohio, and we had a real problem with that university and could not really very effectively deal with them. They took a very hard line. Whereas most of the students that we worked with got exemptions, I think we had a failure at Xavier University here in Ohio. So, I don't understand that. I'd love to know if you ever find the linkage between the Jesuits and these mandates. I'd like to know it. There seems to be a special
I have one.
relationship. Oh, you do? Good.
I believe that Anthony Fauci went to the College of Holy Cross, a private Jesuit liberal arts college located in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And that was where Fauci went. Also, Hunter Biden was a Jesuit. Interestingly, in my movie, the mandates only existed because there was no allowable early treatment, including hydroxychloroquine. And hydroxychloroquine is a derivative of quinine, which comes from cinchona bark, which was also known as Jesuit's bark, because it was the first chemical compound ever used to treat an infectious disease. And we all keep going back to the Jesuits. I'm going to have to run that clip at the end of the show now.
Yeah, that's a great movie. If you haven't seen it, you need to see it.
Yeah.
So,
what does victory look like for you guys, Russ, Patrice? Are you going to get restitution financially, because that was a $40,000 expense for you? Are you going to get maybe some sort of damages awarded to you? What does that look like?
I was like, Russ, I'll let you speak on this.
So, and Warner had alluded to that at the start. A lot of litigate, well, I wouldn't say a lot. One, it was very difficult to find attorneys who wanted to do this. And I should probably throw our profession under the bus, but the bottom line appeared to me to be that if you had business clients that hired your firm, you didn't want to take any chance that they would get crossways with you during COVID. And so it was tremendously difficult to find attorneys who would represent folks. And oddly enough, usually the plaintiff's counsel, and a number of them are probably more on the left side of the political equation. They didn't want to touch it either, which was sort of strange. Just like Warner had talked about, it was an old Carter appointee who was just absolutely determined that personal rights were really a thing, and he was going to protect them. But long story short, the medical profession and the legal profession, I would say it was a fail. It's something that we should be coming to terms with, and I really see no motivation or even activity in that regard. I mean, how often did we hear anything about natural immunity, herd immunity? Those are forgotten terms at this point. So the number of attorneys that were willing to step up when we really needed it were pretty small. And that's part of the reason that Freedom Council, I think, came together. So getting back to your actual question, okay, I'm sorry, I deviated enough there, John, but we asked for damages from the very beginning of these cases. Not that we were actually pushing for injunctions, and that already went to the Nebraska Supreme Court once. By the time that was all decided, it was too late anyway. And so we've just been asking for damages. And I think that was part of the learning process. Is a lot of counts are used to just going in, trying to stop the bleeding. And so they were going the injunction route, and they weren't necessarily adding in damages. But we had damages in from the start. And for someone like Patrice or someone who's another professional, if you delay your entry into the workforce on a mid to high paying job, you're talking about a diminution in lifetime earnings of a significant amount. It's not just missing, 1 year of work. You can calculate what those raises would have been just looking at inflation, and you're talking about pretty significant money for a lot of kids. And some of them just got kicked out of school, period. Some of them are delayed. And so loss of those educational opportunities is real money. And the bottom line is court can actually award nominal damages, which is enough to keep a case going. But we're obviously asking for far more than that. So, Patrice, I think you should probably describe for you what it meant.
Sure. So for me, I'd already mentioned dental school's about $40,000 a semester. It usually increases every year. So, at a minimum, I would like to get back that extra that I had to pay since I never got refunded for that semester that I was kicked out of, that year I was really kicked out of and not allowed to go back, but yet had to continue paying. And as Russ mentioned, as Russ mentioned, the annual salary of a dentist, usually entry is about $150,000, and then it usually goes up from there, as you continue to practice. And if you have your own practice, it can be several $100,000. So, I know Russ, we had talked about, working with an economist at some point and bringing someone in like that to kind of help us. But, it would really just be the damages for the extra tuition and then the loss of income for being delayed for a year. But I do want to just make a statement that, regardless of the money, we're not in this for the money. And although I do think damages are owed, we really wanted to stand up to Creighton because I didn't want any of the students to have to go through what I went through. I don't want anyone to have to be forced to have their education on one side and their livelihood and health on the other. I think there should be a way that we can choose both. So part of this was really just pushing back and wanting to keep our freedom, especially at a Jesuit university, which I know we've already talked about. But I couldn't believe that, the Pope himself said that you can't make this vaccine mandatory. But then Creighton went off and did their own thing and said, well, we're just missing that. Yes, he's our religious leader, but we're going to do our own thing and make it mandatory with very little exemptions. And as Russ mentioned, they offered no religious exemption when they're a religious university. So that to this day, I still don't understand that. They did, kind of backtrack on that about a year later, but I don't know why that was so firm. And then even the medical, it was very, very, very difficult, if not nearly impossible to get a medical exemption. So again, yes, I think there's damages that are owed, mostly in the sense of financial sense, but I really wanted to just make a standing point that I don't want any other students to have to go through what I went through.
That's an excellent answer. Now, when they come to you with a big bag of cash and say, all we ask is that you just sign an NDA and never disclose the settlement, what do you do there?
I don't answer that.
I do want to say something tangential to that, though, which is that we had set up a donation fund for people to help donate with our initial legal costs. And I really wanted to reward those people that sewed into that because this was early days. This would have been 2021, 2022, when vaccines were just getting going and everyone was trying to navigate the situation. And I really, if I ended up with a bag of cash in my hand, I really wanted to pay and reward these people by, doubling or tripling the amount that they sewed in and giving back to them. So that's something that's really on my heart that I would really like to do if this cash ever did, surmount.
I mean, can I add just something to that, John and Warner? So there's two things. One, I need to mention, why was it important to have damages in these cases? And Warner can talk to us a little bit. But mootness was a huge reason that so many of these early cases got tossed. And if the exemptions have come on or if circumstances have changed, by the time you get to an appellate court, the case has become moot unless there's damages. So that's why it's so critical to actually have damages as part of our cases. So the failures that came early helped educate some of us attorneys that filed a little bit later as to what other kinds of claims we would add. But, the other part of this is almost to a T, these students who are named plaintiffs, they want to see justice. And two, they want to provide some protection for the people that come after them because there's very little protection out there for students.
Yeah, Patrice, in the future in your career, I mean, you really are going to have, I think these questions are going to continue to boil up until we get Jacobson overturned. I mean, I think you're going to have a role to play, advising the people who do come after you. I do agree with Russ that our profession, our legal profession, really dropped the ball. The big firms are all compromised by institutional contracts that they have with hospitals and, all the government institutions and things like that. So the only attorneys that became available were these, basically small firm and solo attorneys scattered throughout the country and even around the world. To be frank, we have members from Australia, Canada, and Europe as well. And, I'm glad that we've formed our network, and I do worry about what the future is going to bring and what we're going to need to do in the future with litigation. The one thing that I do think we bring to bear, Russ, is that the individuals who stand up like you, Patrice, really, your case can reverberate through the system and lead the way for other courts to follow. So, unlike, in the medical profession, I think there's obviously was a real problem. Many brave doctors did stand up, but the majority did not. And, but that's a case by case, patient by patient impact. Your case, Patrice, will have a societal impact within your state and within the nation. So I really applaud you doing this. It was so important. I do have one question that I think about with everyone. Why were you able to stand up? What support did you have? What was in your upbringing that made you make this independent decision?
Well, a few things. Number one, definitely my relationship with God and just having the faith that I would be okay and he would take care of me and however this was supposed to go, he would have my back. So that was number one. Number two, I have a very supportive partner. We're now married, husband. So he really took on, the financial burden of helping provide for me during this time that I wasn't working. I wasn't in school. I was kind of just in a free fall, really, not knowing if I would go back, when I would go back. I thought I was going to be kicked out for 2 weeks and then Creighton was going to change their minds. But, 2 weeks quickly turned into almost a year. So both God, my husband, and then also my parents, will also, I will say it took them a little bit to get on board. It took some convincing. I think they were very hesitant on the thought of me not being in school. I've always been very academically driven. I've wanted to be a dentist since I was 10 years old. And I just set my mind on that. And so for them to see this dream kind of get revoked in a very aggressive sense and very quickly, I think was a little scary for them. But now that when we have conversations about it now, I think there's a lot of respect between all of us on why I had to do what I had to do and where we are today. And so I would say, family support, partner support, and then obviously my relationship with God.
What a fantastic answer. I like the word you use, free fall, because I think that that's actually what we experience when we do hand our faith over to God and say, I'm just going to trust God. It feels like a free fall. And that's very hard to deal with and to experience.
This situation exposed, like what you guys were just saying, it was the smaller firms that stepped up. In a lot of instances, it was the few independent practice medical doctors that were also part of the fight. If this had occurred 4 or 5 years later, we've seen a trajectory of it's more and more expensive for independent firms to exist, especially in states like California, where if you don't have deep pockets and huge clients, you can't afford that nice office space. You can't afford to pay for all the additional accoutrement of expenses that come along with owning a business in California. Trust me, I know. Similar thing with private practice in the medical industry. Is this an area that we need to really pressure our politicians to either look at and try to correct or undo some of the things that have hamstrung us? Like, how do we, maybe what we need to do is start encouraging a government that rewards private practice, both in legal and medical areas. What do you guys think about that?
I'll jump in, Russ. On the medical side, look, we used to have an 80-20 split. 80% of medical practitioners were independent, 20% were with the bigger groups. Now, and with hospitals. Now it's completely reversed. The independent medical practitioner is a dying breed at this point at all levels. There are so many corporate and hedge fund and other finance things, and hospitals are just taking over everything. A lot of that came into play with Obamacare. That certainly accelerated it. It was already happening, but with the requirements for electronic health records and all that, the independent practitioners just threw up their hands, and the hospitals swooped in with massive bonuses and benefits for coming into the hospital system. We've litigated that, as you know, I think, because some of that was illegal, but we couldn't stop it. And then among the attorneys, I don't know what the answer is. I see the solo and small firm attorney very much challenged. We saw all these attacks on attorneys that happened to represent Trump. Well, Trump certainly deserved representation. Criminals get representation. I'm not trying to bring a parody there, but everyone deserves representation, no matter what's happened. You're innocent until proven guilty. You have a right to bring your civil lawsuits to vindicate your rights as best you can. But they're literally, attacking, like John Eastman. They're attacking the attorneys who took on, a client who was not popular at the time. Well, he was popular, but he wasn't popular among the legal profession and among the institutions. And I think that's a problem. Now, with that gobbledygook I just said, Russ, why don't you take it from there?
Well, and I think, John, you'll see that it's the concentration of power in any type of institution. Insurance, it's funny how the hospitals and the insurance companies and then the physicians and all their groups always point at the other one. But the barriers to entry for PCP type care, for allowing people who are not in the system to come in and use your surgical space, to have lab testing, they should be decreasing the barriers to entry. I mean, some of those systems that are more widely dispersed, they innovate better. They usually have better outcomes, and they're at a cheaper price. If you look at banking, what is it? There's 6 banks that are just simply too big to fail. Are we going to have health systems? They're going to have a dozen that are too big to fail? Is that really what we want? So there's some serious policy issues decided on the medical side. And for better or worse, the bigger the behemoths become in industry, there's law firms that go with that. I guess, I suppose on the legal side, the judges and the policymakers need to be more cognizant that we shouldn't create a federal court system that's really only made for mega firms that can do expensive electronic discovery. So it's just like 2 behemoths beating each other up, where a smaller firm just doesn't even want to take that on. The cost of litigation in cases like this are expensive. I mean, these are students. They don't have an income. So it's a problem. I'm not saying that there needs to be government assistance or anything for attorneys' fees, but there's some structural things that can be done to try to counterbalance some of the concentration effect.
And I think one of those, just sitting here kind of off the cuff, I mean, one of the issues that we come across in federal court are these Iqbal Twombly standards that really they're pleading standards that are really, I think, being misinterpreted, and individual judges are really ruling in a wide variety of ways, dismissing cases right and left. But there's not a consistency to their rulings if you really dig in there. And I think Congress could correct that in terms of the pleading standards. And those are things that could help revive the small firms as well. It's just really the barrier to entry to the courts, because you put in all this work and then you're faced with a motion to dismiss, and you've got to go on appeal. You guys are facing that right now. Those standards need to be looked at, because traditionally, and you should have what's called notice pleading, where you put the defendant on notice of what the cause was, and then we should rely on juries to make the decision about, how these facts play out and how the law should be applied. But one of the problems that's hurt the small firms is all these barriers to getting something to a jury. And I think that's been something, and I've noticed the change over my career. It's been long enough to really see it play out from when I started to now. And it's very frustrating to see. But that lowering the barrier to getting to a jury would actually assist the small firms in forwarding these cases. I think Russ has a good point about electronic discovery and the increasing technicality of our profession. I've tried to keep up. I mean, I'm 63 and I've tried to keep up, but man, oh man, we're constantly in it. And every one of those technical requirements, it costs you money to deal with it.
Should we have a situation where the government, instead of getting involved, just does breaks up some of these bigger medical institutions, insurance institutions, and creates a series of like baby bells, like they did with Bell in the 70s, 80s?
I'd be interested in hearing Patrice's angle on this, because I don't really know about dental. I have some idea on medical. My wife's a nurse, and I have a number of physician friends. But
yeah, dental is interesting. Similar to what Werner was saying, usually dentists used to be private practice, and there was a very small number of corporations, or as we coin it, DSOs. And now that landscape's starting to shift, and a lot of these smaller dentists that are starting to retire, because the majority are starting to retire. Sorry, there's a fly in my house, so if you've seen me doing that, sorry. Anyway, so a lot of these older dentists are starting to retire, and me coming out of school, I can't afford or I can't get a loan from the bank to be able to buy into a practice right away. Some students do it. Sometimes it's possible, but before, that used to be the normal thing. You would just find a dentist, you would go work for them, be mentored, and then take over their practice. But it's just not as easy. So like you both were saying, Russ and Werner, that barrier of entry has gotten much more difficult. And then you add that layer of insurance on top of it. A lot of the insurance reimbursement rates have not been increased, even though we've had inflation and things are getting more expensive, and dental care costs more than it used to. So you really see this mismatch of, reimbursement versus how much the work that we do costs, for patients. So I don't know exactly where dentists are going. There are a few behemoths out there, a few franchises, chains, DSOs. I know there are, I'm in a few groups on Facebook of dentists where we're trying to, keep that at bay and do what we can to keep small entrepreneurs going. But John, I do think the government could play a role in this. Perhaps they offer grants to dentists that, decide to start a practice outside of school, or somehow make money a little bit more accessible to be able to put into a practice. Just a thought.
Right. And the money, that also plays into another situation, which is the consolidation of the banking industry. You what you talked about, you used to be, if a bank was a community owned bank, they knew they needed dentists. So they might take a risk on you as an independent, as a young student, or a recent graduate. You'd show up in a small town that had a community bank, and the bank goes, well, we need more dentists, so we're going to take a risk on you. But now you have a major checklist that is formatted, and if you don't match every single requirement, you don't get a loan. And this goes to law firms, this goes to production companies, this goes to everything. So So it is an interesting thing. And maybe it's grants. Maybe we need to break up the banks. Boy, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Maybe they actually hold the money that they can pretend to hold in the actual vault at the bank instead of making it all just magic numbers on a computer screen. But what do I know? Guys, this has been a very wonderful. We're about at an hour right now. Is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I just can't thank you enough, Patrice, for standing up, and Russ for representing her. I think I do want people to know these are ongoing battles. They're appearing in different areas of our lives now, and I do want people to know that we do have a group called Freedom Council, freedomcouncil.org, and we are trying to connect clients, people who need help with attorneys that are willing to help and understand the scenarios that you're facing. And it's not over. It's not over by a long shot.
Go ahead, Patrice. I'll finish it after you.
I just want to say thank you to everyone listening for hearing my story and, the legal aspects that Russ shared. It's not easy to make a decision like this. And yes, there will be consequences, but I can promise you it'll be worth it in the end. So I just want to say to everyone out there, don't have fear and just keep your faith, and God will always lead you on the right path.
Do not be afraid.
That's right.
Russ?
Yeah. The one thing I would add is that keep your pressure on your elected officials. It seems like we're sort of in a hiatus in some ways now on at least one side of the aisle. If some other pandemic came up, I think you'd be surprised how little has actually changed legally if things really came unglued. If it's smallpox or something where you're talking about 20% mortality or some serious thing, all bets are off. But if you have something else that doesn't have a high death rate, a lot of the things have not really changed. Congress has essentially done nothing, and most states' legislatures have done almost nothing. It's really case law that's the only protection that seems to be working. So keep your pressure up on your elected official. You haven't done much to stop this a second time.
Correct. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great, actually really, really good interview. I'm going to wrap us up, and you can drop out if you need to. I'm just going to wrap us up with the history of hydroxychloroquine, and you can see the role of the Jesuits in the development of the first medication ever used to treat an infectious disease. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, John.
Yes.
Thanks, Patrice. See you guys.
What is hydroxychloroquine? Hydroxychloroquine is a derivative of chloroquine, one of the first malarial drugs invented. Chloroquine was based off of a drug called quinine. Quinine is also credited as the first chemical compound used to treat an infectious disease. Quinine was initially ground from the bark of a cinchona tree. It was given to settlers from Spain by Indians near Peru in the 1600s and brought to the Western world as a cure for malaria. Eventually, Jesuit priests traveled the world with cinchona bark, so much so that it was commonly known as Jesuit's bark. In 1751, the Spanish crown took control of all the sources of quinine, restricting access as a new form of scientific-based imperialism. At the beginning of the American Revolution, George Washington requested his political masters buy up as much cinchona bark and quinine powder as possible, a deciding factor in the fate of the new nation, because in 1778, the Spanish crown restricted British access to quinine. In 1820, quinine was officially isolated, reducing the need for cinchona tree bark. That development opened the door of European exploration to all of Africa, considered at the time the white man's graveyard, due to how many Europeans died from malaria on the continent. In the 1860s, during the American Civil War, southern states relied heavily on shipping for goods, services, and medications. So Honest Abe Lincoln and his advisors enacted the Northern Blockade to block cotton shipments to Europe, weapons imports, and quinine. Lincoln's goal with blocking quinine was to create as many sick and dead Southern soldiers as possible, because a sick soldier slows down an army and drains resources. This ultimately means that Abraham Lincoln could be considered by some a practitioner of biological warfare against men and women, young and old, free and slave. Things were so desperate for the South that John Wilkes Booth, Lincoln's alleged assassin, smuggled quinine to friends and family. In their desperation, Southern doctors searched for native plants and trees local to the South to replace cinchona. The one that came up the most? The bark of a dogwood tree. When the information was provided to doctors across the South that they had a potential alternative, the doctors didn't use it because they felt it hadn't had enough clinical trials and didn't want to be considered homeopaths. Where have we heard that before?
The information that you're referring to specifically is anecdotal. It was not done in a controlled clinical trial, so you really can't make any definitive statement about it.
The role of quinine in war doesn't stop there. In the 1860s, malaria was a major issue for English soldiers in India. So soldiers began combining the bitter-tasting quinine with water and an alcoholic beverage to get their daily dose of the life-saving medicine. Thus, the gin and tonic was born. The medicinal beverage was so important to the crown that Winston Churchill stated,
"The gin and tonic drink has saved more Englishmen lives and minds than all the doctors in the empire."
With Africa opened up to exploration, European countries vied for colonies and power in Africa, creating rivalries that influenced World War I. By the 1930s, the primary locations for growing cinchona moved from South America to India and Indonesia, lands that would soon be cut off to the Allies. In World War II, the United States was desperate for a source of quinine and cinchona and returned to South America in a series of cinchona missions to build a supply chain and protect Allied troops. At the same time, Nazi scientists weaponized mosquitoes with malaria. The Nazis then conducted experiments on prisoners with these mosquitoes at Dachau concentration camp. Many of these prisoners were Jesuit priests. As World War II drew to a close, when United States and the United Kingdom troops advanced on Rome, the German troops cut window screens of all the homes in the region, confiscated quinine from the residents, and allegedly released their weaponized malaria-loaded mosquitoes. The advancing Allied troops were ready and protected with quinine, cinchona, and chloroquine, but the local population of Italians weren't so lucky. That year, there was a massive spike in civilian casualties from malaria, a parting gift from the fleeing Nazis. Hydroxychloroquine and drugs like it continued to be important over the years. For decades, American troops overseas have taken chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, and other derivatives of those drugs. One of those derivatives, mefloquine, has been implicated in causing post-traumatic stress disorder and neurological issues with troops that were stationed in Iraq. The issues surrounding mefloquine are so great that the drug received a black box warning, the FDA's most stringent warning possible. For centuries now, the restriction of access to hydroxychloroquine, quinine, and drugs like them has been a standard tactic of warfare. It was involved in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, countless smaller wars all across the planet, and most importantly, what one day may be remembered as World War III. We've spoken with numerous pharmacists, doctors, and academics, and very few of them knew the history of hydroxychloroquine and quinine. It makes you wonder, who's really in control of our scientific institutions? And what are we teaching our medical doctors?
I knew as early as February 2020 that I needed to do something.
I recognized that there was a systematic problem and that this was not about hydroxychloroquine, it was something larger.
Fear shut the world down and people made a lot of money at it as they were killing us.
I was asked to speak at a freedom rally that was set up to discredit my reputation.
Whoever orchestrated this must not have the safety of this nation in mind.
Medicine and politics should be separated. These doctors were handcuffed.
The American public has awakened. We have a new civil rights movement to restore our rights, and we're going to hold them accountable.
It is a natural progression of a man of God or woman of character to see injustice, to seek it out, and then to act upon it.
Do you hear me? We will never lock down again. This is the hill we die on.
Don't miss New American Heroes with attorney Warner Mendenhall and John Davidson, Mondays on BrokenTruth.tv.